I was there, in the dead of winter 1475, one of tens of thousands in the army of Sultan Mehmed, marching through the snowbound lands of Moldavia. We were veterans, proud, disciplined, hardened by the siege of Constantinople, the campaigns in Serbia, Bosnia and Wallachia. We'd crushed kings, toppled walls. What could these forest dwellers possibly do to stop us? The land was cold, silent and cruel. Every step forward felt like it took us deeper into the unknown. Villages were empty, burned to ash, wells poisoned. Roads vanished beneath thick fog. And then, the horns sounded. At first we thought it was just another ambush. But this was no raid. Arrows came from all sides. Screams echoed through the trees. We couldn't see 5 steps ahead. Horses panicked. The ground beneath us was soaked not in rain but in blood and mud. Stefan of Moldavia. He wasn't just defending his land. He was hunting us, herding us like animals into the swamp, where thousands of us were cut down. The cold didn't kill us, the fear did. And I was one of the lucky few who escaped Vaslui and lived to tell the tale. With that harrowing account, we would like to welcome you to today's episode in our series on the history of the Ottoman Empire, where we will examine one of the most significant military defeats the Ottomans faced at the Battle of Vaslui and Mehmed's war with Moldavia. Every week we release 3 new exclusive videos for our members and patrons. The Pacific War, the Eastern Front of World War II Prelude, and many other series, including the War of Spanish Succession, Punic Wars, Iberian Reconquista, Russian Revolution and Civil War, North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, and much more. It has been long overdue, but we have finally created a YouTube channel exclusively for our Kings and Generals podcasts. Please go and check out Kings and Generals podcast, home to the Pacific War Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, link in the description and pinned comment. To see those, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job. After his significant victory over Uzun Hasan at Otlukbeli, Sultan Mehmed II began to march his grand army back to the capital. Following numerous years of military campaigning, the Sultan's eastern borders were finally secured against the Turkic powers of the Karamanids and Akkayunlu. However, Mehmed's military triumphs were dampened when his beloved son, Shahzada Mustafa, fell ill and died the following year, shocking many in the government. The Ottoman prince had been the most promising of Mehmed's 3 sons, and had been groomed as a potential heir. Outraged by Mustafa's sudden death, the Sultan blamed the tragedy on Mahmud Pasha. The Grand Vizier was first detained and stripped of his titles before being executed, a move that highlighted Mehmed's increasing authoritarianism toward members of his own government. Mahmud's rival, Gedik Ahmed Pasha, may have also played a role in the Vizier's rapid downfall, as he was soon hailed as Grand Vizier in 1474. Mahmud Pasha, the Ottoman statesman who loyally and dutifully served the Sultan over 2 decades in various military expeditions in the Balkans and Anatolia, was buried in Constantinople. After Skanderbeg's death back in 1468, the Albanian revolt against the Ottomans had lost its central leader and driving force. The Albanian lord had successfully unified various nobles of his homeland and led a 25-year resistance that kept the Turks at bay through a combination of brilliant military tactics and forming alliances with Western European powers. Nevertheless, with Skanderbeg's death, the Albanian nobility lacked a unifying figure to lead its armies. Skanderbeg's son, John II Kastrioti, was too young and inexperienced to assume leadership, and none of the surviving noble families commanded the same respect or allegiance from the broader Albanian population. Nevertheless, local resistance efforts continued in the region, with limited Venetian backing from the Doge's strongholds in Shkodra, Durrës and Lezhë. While Sultan Mehmed spent much of 1474 in his imperial palace due to recurring gout, he dispatched an army to the west to address the ongoing Albanian revolt. After being unable to capture Durrës back in 1467, the Sultan tasked Hadim Suleiman Pasha with besieging Shkodra to cut off aid to Albania from the north. Leading a provisional army of over 20,000, the Romanian Bela Bey marched across the Balkans in the spring and laid siege to the Venetian stronghold by mid-May. Although its walls crumbled under heavy Ottoman artillery fire, the local garrison managed to hold out for several months. In the final assault in August alone, the Turkish forces suffered 3,000 casualties. As his losses mounted, and news of a Christian fleet approaching to relieve the siege arrived, the Ottoman Pasha withdrew his army from Shkodra to the great jubilation of the Venetians. However, instead of returning to the imperial capital, Suleiman received new orders from Mehmed II to muster a fresh army and march towards the Danube, as a new threat arose in the distant lands of Moldavia. Like its sister state of Wallachia, the Principality of Moldavia was founded in the mid-14th century amid the decline of Mongol dominance in Eastern Europe and the weakening of the Kingdom of Hungary's eastern frontier. Around 1345, Dragoș of Maramureș, a Vlach noble, was sent by the Hungarian crown to establish a border march against Tatar incursions in the east. He succeeded in creating a realm, marking the beginning of Moldavia as a political entity. Soon after Dragoș's death, his successors were expelled by Bogdan I, a rival voivode who had rebelled against Hungarian authority and asserted Moldavian independence around 1359. Under him and his successors, Moldavia evolved into a principality, with its own institutions, military and royal dynasty. The realm's territory stretched between the Carpathians and the Dniester River, encompassing key trade routes to the Black Sea. Nevertheless, by the late 14th century, Moldavia was forced to contend with the influences of Hungary, Poland and the rising Ottomans, all of whom coveted its vital Black Sea port towns of Achaemen and Kilia. Much like Wallachia, the principality served as a crucial buffer state for all three during the 15th century. By 1451, Bogdan II of Moldavia was murdered and usurped by his brother Peter III, who became an official vassal of Poland while also paying an annual tribute to the Ottomans. However, Bogdan's son Stephen received support from the Hungarian armies of John Hunyadi. Along with his cousin Vlad III Dracula, he reclaimed the throne from his relative by 1457. The new ruler continued to pay tribute to the Ottomans and used the peace to reform his realm. He expanded and professionalized the army, creating a standing force of mercenaries and enhancing the mobilization of peasant levies. The power of the Vlach nobility was also curtailed, as new judicial laws and tax codes were enacted to promote central control from the capital of Suceava. In 1462, the opportunistic Stefan III supported Ottoman armies during their war against Wallachia to recapture Kilia. This goal was achieved by 1465, allowing Stefan to gain control over the strategic Danube delta. Observing that Moldavia was beginning to re-establish itself as a regional player under their ambitious ruler, the King of Hungary, Matthias Corvinus, invaded the country in 1467. There, the Hungarian monarch faced a humiliating defeat at the Battle of Baia, losing up to 10,000 men and sustaining injuries himself. The victorious Stefan followed up on his significant triumph by raiding Transylvania and thwarting a Golden Horde invasion at Lipnitz over the next 4 years. It was also during this period that his former exiled rival, Peter III, attempted to seize the Moldavian throne alongside the forces of Radu III of Wallachia. Ultimately, he was unsuccessful in his attempts. By the early 1470s, the relationship between Mehmed II and Stefan had begun to deteriorate, as the Sultan insisted that Kilia be returned to Wallachian control. While Ottoman armies were engaged in Anatolia against Uzun Hasan, Stefan III terminated his tributary status with the Sublime Porte and invaded Wallachia in the fall of 1473. The strongly pro-Ottoman Radu III was defeated in battle and replaced by his Daneshti relative Basarab III. However, by the end of the year, Radu reclaimed his throne with the support of Mihalolu Ali Bey and 17,000 Akinji raiders who plundered the local countryside as the new year approached. Yet the reign of the Impaler's brother was not destined to last long, as by the spring of 1474, Basarab regained power once again with Moldavian assistance. With Wallachian politics once again in turmoil and the loyal Radu III deposed, Mehmed sent Stefan an ultimatum. The Moldavian king would either pay his annual tribute, pay homage to the Sultan in Constantinople, and cede Kilia to the empire immediately, or face the wrath of the Ottoman armies. By the summer of 1474, the Sultan received his response from the Moldavian voivode, a staggering refusal of all conditions. Shortly thereafter, official war was declared, and orders were sent to Hadim Suleiman Pasha to march on Moldavia. The Romanian Bey spent the rest of the year gathering reinforcements for his war-weary army in Sofia. Although it was long past the campaigning season, Suleiman managed to assemble around 30 to 40,000 troops for the Moldavian War. This provincial force consisted of Azibs, Janissaries, Akinjis, Tamali Sipahi heavy cavalry, and a number of Bulgarian engineers, tasked with clearing out roads and bridges of the local region. With Turkish troops gathering so close to his borders, Basarab III reverted his realm's status to that of an Ottoman vassal, and also pledged a contingent of Wallachian cavalry for Suleiman's war effort. As a result, the pathway into Moldavia was opened to the Ottomans. Meanwhile, Stefan was able to gather around 20,000 troops for the upcoming war. Half of his army consisted of peasant conscripts, mobilized from the countryside, and the regular Moldavian army, which included professional infantry, light and heavy boyar cavalry, and 20 cannons. The other half of the army consisted of foreign auxiliaries and mercenaries from neighboring Christian kingdoms, including 5,000 CK infantry, 2,000 Polish cavalry, 1,800 Hungarian infantry, cavalry and handgunners, and lastly 1,000 Wallachian volunteers. By November 1474, Suleiman began crossing the frozen Danube in 2 columns from Vidin and Nicopolis. Regardless, the weather had already turned for the worse, slowing the Ottoman host's march north. Recognizing that his men were cold and exhausted, Suleiman rested his troops for over 2 weeks near Bucharest, where he received reinforcements from Basarab's promised contingent of 10,000 Wallachians. By December, the Turkish forces entered Moldavia, but Stefan was prepared and utilized scorched earth tactics to confront the invaders. Hundreds of villages were burned, their wells poisoned, and their local inhabitants relocated to create supply issues for the far more numerous Ottoman army. This was a war of attrition, and Stefan was accustomed to battling superior opponents, continually harassing the Ottomans with his hit-and-run tactics, reminiscent of those employed by his cousin Vlad the Impaler. After nearly a month of marching through the abandoned countryside in freezing conditions, Turkish scouts sighted a few dozen intact villages in a valley where the Balad River flows south of the town of Vaslui on the 10th of January 1475. With heavy fog, rain and frigid temperatures plaguing his men, Suleiman decided to rest his army in the supply-rich region before continuing his march northward to the Moldavian capital. However, as the Ottoman troops began to cross the river over the only bridge in the area, Moldavian battle drums were heard in the north. Convinced that Stefan's entire army was ahead, Suleiman hastily advanced his troops through the dense fog and ordered the army to assemble on the western side of the river. As the drum roll continued, more Ottoman soldiers crossed the river and moved through the marshes to the north, forming a makeshift battle formation. Regardless, this brought the exhausted and now panicked Turkish host into a narrow valley, from which showers of arrows rained upon them. Situated at the end of the marshland was the Moldavian army, fortified behind earthworks and trenches. As the Ottoman front lines finally came into contact with Stefan's regular army and troops from Poland, Hungary and Transylvania, a bloody hand-to-hand melee ensued over the highly fortified positions on the marshland. Hearing the news of the struggle, Suleiman Pasha, stationed at the rear of the army and unable to assess the situation on the front lines, ordered a general advance and began rushing men across the small wooden bridge. Unbeknownst to him, he had just led his army into a trap. As reinforcements crossed the river, Moldavian cannon fire and barrages from the handgunners had begun to bombard the Turkish host from the opposite side of the river. The now panicked Suleiman began rushing his heavy cavalry across the wooden bridge, and this, combined with cannon fire, ultimately caused the unsturdy bridge to collapse. While Turkish reinforcements now attempted to cross the freezing cold river, the Wallachian contingent refused to do so, leading to significant tensions within the Ottoman army mid-battle. A fierce war of words caused Basarab to withdraw his support for Suleiman, thereby initiating his withdrawal from the battle. Meanwhile, back on the front lines, the Ottoman Sipahis were successful in pushing the left wing of the Sikayas and the Moldavian professionals. However, this lured the army further into the grasp of Stefan. Suddenly, the Moldavian war drums were heard from the forest to the left of the Ottoman line. Completely exposed, Ottoman officers panicked. Having never been made fully aware of the tactical situation, Suleiman tried to form a secondary line to defend against the threat on his left side. Nevertheless, the main Moldavian attack was planned against the Ottoman right flank, and the heavy boyar cavalry of Stefan, which had been hidden behind a forested hill until then, charged into the rear and flank of the Ottoman host. Despite still outnumbering their opponents, the now exhausted Turkish host thought that they were surrounded from 3 sides and began routing en masse. The battle had now turned into a massacre, in which individual Ottoman units fled the battlefield in all directions. During the 3-day Great Retreat, the remains of Suleiman's host were run down by Moldavian cavalry, resulting in many Ottoman officers being taken captive and then executed. The Battle of Vaslui would become one of the most significant defeats in Ottoman history. The Sublime Porte suffered up to 20,000 casualties during the battle, compared to Stefan's 5,000. Like Skanderbeg before him, the Moldavian ruler was anointed by the Pope with the title of Athletic Christi for his great victory over the Turks. However, such a victory was to be celebrated only briefly, as in the following months after the battle, Stefan would conclude an alliance with Hungary, knowing that Mehmed's wrath would soon be at the gates of his realm. Since the Ottoman conquest of Serbia and Bosnia, the Turkish marcher lords of the Balkans gradually intensified their raids deep into Europe. In 1474, Mihalolu Ali Bey had launched a significant raid into Hungary. He reached as far as Oradea, enslaving and looting as he progressed through the country. Later that year, Turkish raiders from Bosnia also invaded Croatia, extending as far as Varaždin, Metlika and Petui. By the time of the disaster at Vaslui, Ottoman raiders had penetrated into the border regions of Carniola and Carinthia, causing significant panic in the royal courts of both Hungary and Austria. Due to these devastating incursions into his realm, Matthias Corvinus pledged support for Stefan's war effort against Mehmed. Pausing his campaign in Bohemia, the Hungarian king gathered an army of 10,000 and marched on the recently constructed Ottoman fortress of Šabac in the fall of 1475. By the start of the new year, the fortress was besieged with the assistance of the titular despot of Serbia, Vuk Gregorović, the grandson of Đurđ Branković. After 30 days, Šabac fell to the invaders, thus further securing the hinterland surrounding Belgrade from additional Ottoman incursions across the Danube. In the weeks following the siege, Hungarian raids into Turkish-controlled Bosnia and Serbia commenced. This included the looting of many towns by none other than a newly released Vlad Dracula. As he had done over a decade ago, the former Wallachian voivode impaled and massacred soldiers and civilians alike during yet another campaign of terror. In retaliation for the fall of Šabac, the Ottoman marcher lords of Serbia resumed their destructive raids into Hungary throughout the summer of 1476, overrunning the Banat of Temesvar. However, the force was to be defeated at the town of Bela Crkva during their journey back to friendly territory. Further raids into Croatia and Slovenia were also initiated, with the sacking of towns such as Grk, Vipava, Postojna and Ljubljana. By the end of the year, Ottoman raids had extended as far as Tavisio, Arnoldstein and Villach, as peasant revolts erupted in the broader region. The situation was so dire that King Matthias's bride, Princess Beatrice of Naples, had to navigate her way into her future husband's plundered kingdom through charred villages and fields of corpses, while desperately trying to avoid Turkish raiders. By the spring of 1476, Sultan Mehmed had recovered from his bout of gout and planned to personally march on Moldavia to take revenge for the Battle of Vaslui. Like Germanicus avenging the fallen Roman legions at the Teutoburg forest, the Ottoman Sultan aimed to restore the honor of his armies in the upcoming war. Gathering a force of 40,000 in Sofia, the Sultan marched along the Black Sea coast and reached the Danube in early summer. While it took the army over 3 days to cross the Great River, Mehmed's Tatar allies from Crimea also invaded Moldavia from the east. Nevertheless, they were routed near Akerman by Stefan's forces and pushed out of the country entirely, thus thwarting Mehmed's plan to open a second front in the war. Like a year and a half earlier, the Moldavian voivode intended to employ scorched earth tactics and attrition warfare against a numerically superior foe. However, Mehmed did not repeat the mistakes of the previous expedition and marched cautiously through the region to ensure the safety of his supply lines. As the Ottoman army advanced towards Suceava through the White Valley, also known as Valea Albă, they finally encountered Stefan's host of 12,000. The Turkish vanguard, led by none other than Hadim Suleiman Pasha himself, was ambushed by the Moldavian ruler and suffered heavy losses. It was only with the arrival of the main Ottoman army that the Rumelian Beylerbeyi's contingent was saved, forcing Stefan to retreat to his camp. Due to the fact that he had not been reinforced with troops from Poland and Hungary, as had been the case the previous year, the voivode decided to go on the defensive and allow the invaders to attack his fortified line, which was located behind a forest. The next day, Mehmed ordered a general advance of his army, but this resulted in a great blunder, as the forest through which the army passed was set ablaze by the Moldavians, resulting in many casualties to the Ottoman host. During this panic, the army was also showered with incoming fire from Moldavian handgunners and artillery from ahead. It was only when the Sultan arrived on the front lines and rallied his officers and janissaries that morale in the Ottoman army resurged. Now being overwhelmed by his opponent's numbers on all sides, Stefan withdrew his host from the battlefield in order to prepare for the siege of his capital. Although Mehmed had secured a victory at the Battle of Valea Albă, it had come at a heavy cost. Between 5,000 and 10,000 Ottomans had been killed or wounded during the course of the battle, compared to only around 1,000 Moldavians. Due to these high losses and plague now roaming the local countryside, the Sultan was unable to follow up on his victory over Stefan, who had fled to the Polish border to reassemble his strength. Unable to seize the primary fortresses of the region, such as Kilia, Akerman and Suceava, Mehmed concluded his campaign by the end of the summer, but not before ravaging the entirety of Moldavia. Although now left in ruins, Stefan's realm managed to survive Mehmed's onslaught and maintain its independence. With Ottoman armies now gone from the local region, King Matthias ordered his vassal, Stefan Batory of Transylvania, to invade Wallachia alongside the Moldavians to restore Vlad to his throne. By the fall of 1476, Basarab III had lost his throne once again. However, in a demonstration of the volatility of Wallachian politics, he managed to regain power by the start of 1477 with Ottoman support. During this struggle, Vlad was cornered at the town of Snegov and was beheaded by Turkish agents. The head of the Impaler prince was soon sent to Mehmed, where it was placed upon a high stake for all to see in the imperial capital. 15 years after his initial campaign of terror in the Balkans, Vlad III Dracula had finally been defeated and killed, representing a significant propaganda victory for Sultan Mehmed II. With Wallachia secured and Moldavia on the back foot, Mehmed now turned his gaze to his wars elsewhere in the Balkans. In the next episode in our series on the Ottomans, we will look at the conclusion of the Venetian and Albanian wars, in addition to the fall of Theodoro and the vassalization of the Crimean Khanate. To ensure you don't miss that, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.